She waited until my dad's funeral flowers were still fresh. Then she walked into the insurance office with forged signatures and redirected every penny of my inheritance into her son's account. She looked me in the eye and said I was never his priority. My stepmother looked me dead in the eyes 3 days after we buried my father and said, "Your dad always meant for Troy to have everything. You were never really his priority." I was 29 years old, standing in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, and she said it like she was reading the weather. No hesitation, no shame. What Denise didn't know, what nobody knew, was that my dad had spent the last year of his life making sure she'd never get away with exactly this. He just didn't live long enough to tell me himself. My name is Callum. I'm 31 now. I'm a paramedic in Bristol, and this is the story of how my stepmother tried to steal everything my father left me and how she lost it all in court. I need to go back, though, way back. My mom died when I was 4, cancer. I barely remember her face without looking at photos. My dad, Robert, was a postal worker. Solid bloke, quiet, did his rounds, came home, made us beans on toast, read me a story. That was life for 3 years, just me and him. Then Denise showed up. Dad married her when I was 7. She brought her son Troy into the house. Same age as me, same school year. That's where the similarities ended. From day one, the hierarchy was obvious. Troy got new school uniforms every September. I got Troy's old ones with the name tag unpicked and mine sewn in. Troy got weekend football camps at 40 quid a session. When I asked to join, Denise shook her head and said they couldn't afford 2. Birthday parties were Troy-only events. Big ones, bouncy castles, 10 mates from school, party bags. I got a card and a supermarket cake. I ate it alone in the kitchen while Troy's lot screamed in the garden. I'm not telling you this for pity. I'm telling you so you understand what Denise was. Calculated, consistent. She never screamed at me, never hit me. She just made sure I knew every single day that I was second, that I was the extra mouth, the inconvenience. My dad wasn't cruel. I want to be clear about that. But he was weak where Denise was concerned. Conflict averse doesn't even cover it. He'd find me in the hallway after some fresh humiliation, slip me a 20-pound note, and mutter, "Sorry, mate." That was it. That was his version of standing up for me. A crumpled note and 2 words in a whisper. He never once told Denise to treat me the same as Troy. Not once. So I learned the rules early. Keep your head down. Don't make waves. Don't ask for things. Survive until you can leave. I moved out at 18, got a shared flat in Bedminster with 2 other lads, and started my paramedic training. I built a life. Small, but mine. And the funny thing is, once I was out of that house, my relationship with Dad actually got better. We had Sunday phone calls, the odd pub lunch in Clifton when Denise was visiting her sister. He never badmouthed her to me. Not directly. But once, about a year before he died, he said something I didn't understand at the time. We were sitting in a corner booth at the Merchant's Arms, and he looked at me over his pint and said, "I've made sure you're sorted, Cal. Whatever happens, just trust me on that." I laughed it off, told me he was being dramatic. He died 8 months later, sudden cardiac arrest, 56 years old. I got the call while I was on shift, and because I'm a paramedic, I knew exactly what had happened to his heart. I knew the timeline. I knew the oxygen window. I knew precisely how long my father's brain stayed conscious after his heart stopped. That detail still keeps me up at night. The funeral was Denise's production. She controlled the guest list, the readings, the eulogy, even which photos sat on the table by the door. Not a single one included me. Troy gave a reading from Corinthians. I sat in the 3rd row like a distant cousin nobody could quite place. Within a week, Denise changed the locks on the family home. She sat me down in a Costa on Gloucester Road and told me there was no will. Robert had died intestate, she said. As his legal spouse, everything was hers. The house, the savings, the rental property in Southville, all of it. She delivered this with the rehearsed calm of someone who had been planning it for months. But I noticed things. Small things. She'd already contacted the letting agent about the Southville property. She'd already rung the insurance company. She was moving fast. Too fast for a woman who'd supposedly just lost the love of her life. I almost believed her. I almost walked away and let her have it all. I was tired. I was grieving. I was conditioned from 22 years of being the one who doesn't make waves. And then I got a phone call from a man I hadn't spoken to in 15 years. My dad's oldest friend, a retired solicitor named Gerald. His voice was careful and steady, and he said 6 words that changed everything. Your father left you a will. Gerald called me on a Tuesday evening. I was halfway through a 12-hour shift, sitting in the back of the ambulance eating a sandwich that tasted like nothing. I hadn't eaten properly since Dad died. Gerald said he needed to see me, not on the phone, in person, tomorrow. We met at a Costa in Broadmead. Gerald was 71, walked with a stick, looked like he hadn't slept in a fortnight. I'd known him vaguely as a kid, Dad's oldest mate from their school days at Fairfield Grammar. They'd drifted in and out of each other's lives the way men do, but apparently they drifted back in about 18 months before Dad died. Gerald slid a small key across the table. Brass. Unremarkable. He said it was for a safety deposit box at the Lloyd's branch on Corn Street. Then he told me the rest. Dad had gone to see him a year and a half ago. Sober. Serious. Sat in Gerald's living room in Redland and said he needed a will drawn up properly. Notarized. Witnessed. Airtight. He told Gerald he didn't trust Denise. He said he'd wanted to leave her for years, but couldn't do it while Troy was still living at home, still dependent. He was worried about what she'd do to his assets if something happened to him. He was worried about me. The will was clear. I was to receive £187,500 from a life insurance policy. I was also to receive Dad's 50% share of the rental property in Southville, the one he'd bought with a mate back in 2005. Denise got the family home and his pension. A fair split, more than fair, but not the total control she'd assumed was coming. Gerald had stored the original will in the safety deposit box and kept a certified copy at his flat. He looked at me across that sticky table and said, "Your dad knew this might happen. He just hoped it wouldn't." I sat there for a long time. My coffee went cold. The girl behind the counter called someone's name 3 times, and nobody collected the drink. I kept thinking about that night at the Merchant's Arms. "I've made sure you're sorted, Cal." He had. He actually had. I drove to the family home that evening. Denise answered the door in a dressing gown. Behind her, in the living room, I could see Troy stretched out on the sofa, playing on a brand new PlayStation. The box was still on the floor. "I know about the will, Denise," I said. "Dad left one. I've seen it." Her face tightened, just for a second. Then the mask slid back on. "I don't know what you've been told, but there's no will. Your father and I discussed this. Everything stays in the family. I am his family." She tilted her head like I'd said something amusing. "You're his first wife's son. Troy is the one who is here every day. Troy is the one who matters. The will is notarized," I said. "It names me specifically. The insurance payout, $187,500. That's mine. The Southville property share, that's mine." Her voice dropped, low and steady and dangerous. "If you try to come after what's ours, I will make your life hell. I've already spoken to the insurance company. That money's been sorted. It's done. Done." She said it like that. Past tense. Already handled. I left. I sat in my car on the street I grew up on, and my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I called Gerald, told him every word she'd said. He went quiet for a moment, and then spoke carefully. "She's just told you she's already moved the money. That's not grief, Callum. That's theft." He told me to write everything down. Every word. The date, the time, what she was wearing, what Troy was doing in the background. All of it. I drove back to my flat in Bedminster, sat at the kitchen table, and opened a blank notebook. I'm a paramedic. I'm trained to stay calm when everything around me is falling apart, to document, to follow protocol, to focus on the next step, not the chaos. So that's what I did. I started building a file. Gerald couldn't represent me formally. He let his practicing certificate lapse years ago, but he knew exactly which forms to file, which court to approach, and how to structure a fraud complaint. He became my unofficial advisor. We met twice a week at that same Costa. He'd mark up my documents with a red pen and repeat the same phrase every time. "Your dad asked me to look after this. I'm not letting him down." 2 weeks later, I got the bank records back from a subject access request I'd filed with the insurance company. I spread them across my kitchen table at 11 at night, still in my uniform, and that's when I saw it. the forged signature on the insurance redirection form. It was my dad's name in Denise's handwriting. The loops were wrong, the slant was wrong, and the payout, every penny of it, had gone straight into Troy's account. The forged signature was just the start. Once I knew what to look for, the whole thing unraveled fast. Gerald and I opened the safety deposit box on Corn Street on a Wednesday morning. Inside was the original will, dated 18 months before Dad died. 2 witnesses, Gerald's signature and a woman named Patricia, who'd worked at his old firm. Notarized, dated, airtight, just like Dad had wanted. The subject access request gave me the insurance paperwork. The redirection form had been submitted 6 days after Dad's death. 6 days. She hadn't even waited for the flowers on his grave to wilt. The signature on that form said Robert Gallagher, but it wasn't his hand. I knew it. Gerald knew it. And we were about to make sure a judge knew it too. That's when Priya stepped in. Priya was my crewmate on the ambulance. We'd worked together for 3 years. Before she'd retrained as a paramedic, she'd spent 7 years in financial admin at a building society in Bath. She understood bank records the way I understood cardiac rhythms. When I told her what was happening, she didn't hesitate. She said, "Right, show me everything." She pulled the transfer records. 187,500 pounds moved from the insurance company directly into an account in Troy's sole name. Not a joint account, not Denise's account, Troy's. She'd been clever about that, one step removed. Then Priya did something that changed the case. She found 3 comparison signatures from Dad's genuine documents. His employment contract with Royal Mail, his mortgage application from 2009, and a birthday card he'd signed for me when I turned 21 that I'd kept in a drawer for 8 years. She laid them beside the forgery on my kitchen table and pointed. The differences were obvious. Even I could see them. The slant was wrong. The pressure was too heavy in places and too light in others. And the R in Robert had a loop at the top that Dad never used. His R was always sharp, always angular. The forger had guessed at that letter, and guessed wrong. We also got a letter from the letting agent for the Southville property. Denise had contacted them 2 weeks after the funeral, presented herself as sole owner, and tried to redirect the rental income to her personal account. Income that, according to the will, should have been split. She'd tried to take everything, every single penny. Denise fought back hard. She hired a solicitor, paid for it with my inheritance money, which is a detail that still makes my jaw clench. Her solicitor filed a counterclaim, arguing that Dad had verbally revoked the will before he died, and that the notarized copy was outdated and unenforceable. Gerald got a threatening letter at his flat in Redland, calling the will contested, and suggesting he'd manipulated a vulnerable man. Gerald read it, folded it neatly, and said, "She's panicking. Good." Troy went public. He posted on Facebook and Instagram that I was harassing a grieving widow, that I was trying to steal from my own family, that I had always been jealous of him. Denise's friends piled on. My phone filled with messages from people I hadn't spoken to since school, calling me selfish, ungrateful, a parasite. One of Denise's cousins sent me a message that just said, "Your dad would be ashamed of you." I nearly broke after that one. I sat in the ambulance station car park at 2 in the morning and thought about dropping the whole thing. Then I opened Instagram and saw Troy had posted a photo of a brand new BMW M4, 40,000 pounds. The caption said, "Dad would have wanted this." I went back inside and finished my shift. Gerald connected me with a litigation solicitor named Harriet Chen. Her firm was in Queen Square. She reviewed the file in one meeting and took the case on a conditional fee arrangement. No win, no fee. She told me the evidence was, and I'm quoting her directly, embarrassingly strong. The strategy was simple. File in Bristol County Court for recovery of the full inheritance, present the forgery evidence, and let Denise's counterclaim collapse under its own weight. Harriet also flagged the case to Action Fraud, which opened a separate criminal investigation into the forged insurance documents. Priya kept me going through the worst of it. She spent her own evenings helping me organize the evidence into a timeline Harriet could use. When I told her I was thinking about quitting, she grabbed my arm and said, "You're not doing this for money. You're doing this because your dad went out of his way to protect you, and she's spitting on that." She was right. The court date was set for a Tuesday in March. That morning, Denise's solicitor called Harriet and asked if we'd accept a private settlement, 50% of the inheritance, no admission of wrongdoing. Harriet looked at me across her desk and said, "It's your call. I said one word. No. Bristol County Court, a Tuesday in March. Gray sky, gray building, gray carpet in the waiting area. I sat on one side with Harriet and Gerald. Gerald had worn a suit. First time I'd seen him in anything other than a fleece. Denise sat on the other side with Troy and her solicitor, a man who looked increasingly uncomfortable from the moment we walked in. Harriet was calm, methodical. She laid out the evidence piece by piece, like she was dealing cards. The notarized will went in first. Then the bank transfer records, showing every penny of 187,500 pounds routed into Troy's account. Then the letting agent's letter, confirming Denise had falsely claimed sole ownership of the Southville property. And then the signature comparison went up on the screen. 3 genuine signatures on the left, the forgery on the right. The whole courtroom could see it. The slant, the pressure, that looped R that my father never once used in his life. Denise's solicitor tried to argue verbal revocation. He started talking about his client's testimony regarding conversations with the deceased. Judge Hargreaves, a district judge who looked like she'd heard every lie ever invented, cut him off mid-sentence. Mrs. Linton, do you have any written evidence that the deceased revoked this will? A letter? An email? A text message? Denise's solicitor shifted in his seat. My client's testimony is that the deceased expressed a clear intention to... I asked for evidence, the judge said, not testimony. The will before me is notarized, properly witnessed, and dated. The signature on the insurance redirection form is, by any reasonable assessment, not the deceased's handwriting. Do you dispute the forensic comparison? We would argue that the comparison is not conclusive. I've seen enough. The courtroom went quiet. The judge ruled that the will was valid and enforceable. The insurance redirection was fraudulent. Denise was ordered to repay the full 187,500 pounds, plus 14,000 in legal costs. The judge looked directly at Denise when she delivered her closing remark. The deceased went to considerable lengths to protect his son's inheritance. The respondent went to considerable lengths to steal it. The law is not ambiguous here. Denise stood up. Her chair scraped back across the floor, and she pointed at me and shouted, "That boy was never part of this family." The judge warned her once. She sat down. Troy stared at the table and said nothing. He didn't look at me. Not once. The fallout was swift. Denise had to sell personal assets and take out loans to repay the full amount. The criminal investigation by Action Fraud continued. She now faces potential prosecution for forgery and fraud by false representation. That carries up to 10 years. Troy had to sell the BMW. Got $31,000 for a car he'd paid $40,000 for 6 weeks earlier. He moved back in with Denise. He never contacted me. Not to apologize, not to explain. Denise's counterclaim was dismissed with costs. Her solicitor quietly withdrew. The friends who'd attacked me online went silent. A few sent messages that danced around the word sorry without ever actually using it. The letting agent formally recognized me as co-owner of the Southville property. I started receiving my share of the rental income for the first time, about $650 a month. 3 weeks after the ruling, Troy texted me. "Can we talk? I didn't know what she did. I swear I didn't know." I didn't reply for 2 days. Then I met him at a cafe in Stokes Croft. He looked thinner. He said Denise had told him the money was a gift from Robert. that it was always meant for him, that there was no will. I listened. I didn't shout. I said, "You posted a photo of that car and said Dad would have wanted it. You knew what she was like your whole life. You didn't ask a single question." Troy didn't have an answer. I paid for both coffees and left. Haven't heard from him since. I used part of the inheritance to put a deposit on a 2-bedroom flat in Totterdown. Nice view of the city. I kept working as a paramedic. Never wanted to stop. I set up a standing order to donate £200 a month to Winston's Wish, a children's bereavement charity Dad had supported quietly for years. I didn't know about it until Gerald told me. Even his kindness was hidden. Gerald came to the flat warming. Priya brought a plant. I hung one photo of Dad in the hallway, him in his postal uniform, grinning, holding a young me on his shoulders outside the suspension bridge. It's the first thing I see every morning. People ask me if I feel guilty about what happened to Denise. I don't. She didn't just steal money. She tried to erase my father's last act of love. He spent 18 months quietly building a wall around my future, and she tore it down in 6 days. What I feel isn't guilt, it's grief. I grieve that my dad had to hide his love for me in a safety deposit box because he couldn't say it out loud in his own house. But he did it, and it was enough. Dad, if you can hear this, it was enough.